Have you ever had that feeling where you finally fix a nagging problem? You might have organized your workspace or you automated a repetitive task, only to realize a week later that you just created three more new problems that you didn't have before? It's really frustrating. You feel like you're kind of running on a treadmill. You're moving faster than you've ever moved, but your stress levels are exactly the same and sometimes even worse. We're living in an era, especially as we get deeper into the late 2020s, that seems to be obsessed with the instant fix. We have apps to optimize our sleep. AI writes our emails. Algorithms let us know what our preferences are. There's videos and articles all over the internet with titles like 5 must-have accessories to make you more productive. We've become masters of the first order solution. A first order solution is simple. It addresses the immediate symptom. It provides immediate temporary relief to whatever problem we're experiencing. Our brains are actually hardwired to crave this. From an evolutionary perspective, if you're being chased by a predator, your brain doesn't want a complex analysis of the situation. It wants an immediate solution. Run. We're biologically incentivized to prioritize short-term relief over long-term consequences. A good example of the first order solution is the recent explosion of seamless AI automation in the corporate world. On the surface, it looks like a huge win for businesses. Companies are implementing AI agents to handle customer service, data entry, even basic decision making. The first order result: efficiency skyrockets, costs plummet. The problem of human error and labor and the costs involved seems to be solved. But take a closer look, because these systems aren't so seamless. We've entered a massive, unforeseen crisis in data sovereignty. As we offload our decision making to these black box models, we're inadvertently feeding them the very essence of our intellectual property and our personal agency. We solved the problem of workload, but we created a new, much more complex problem of autonomy. We fixed the bottleneck, but we accidentally snapped a wire in the very foundation of how we control and interpret our own information. This is the trap of the quick fix. It offers the comfort of an immediate win, but it casts a long, growing shadow of unintended side effects. And if we don't learn to look into that shadow, we'll find ourselves constantly fighting fires that we started ourselves. So how do we stop being surprised by our own solutions? We really need to move from first order thinking to second order thinking. Second order thinking is a relatively simple mental model, but it requires a very disciplined mindset. It's the ability to look at a decision and relentlessly ask the question, and then what? First order thinking stops at the immediate result. Second order thinking follows the chain of what's going to happen next until a full picture emerges. Let's look at a classic example: corporate cost cutting. Imagine a CEO looking at a quarterly report. They see rising expenses and they decide on a solution: a targeted reduction in workforce and a freeze on all the employee benefits. The first order effect is immediate and it's very visible. The balance sheet looks great. Expenses are down. The problem of shrinking margins is solved. The CEO celebrates. But then, what if we ask, and then what? The second order effects begin to ripple. With fewer people, the workload on the remaining staff dramatically increases. Burnout starts to set in. Because the benefits were cut, top tier talent, these are the people who hold the most institutional knowledge, they start looking for an exit. Now you have a solution that has actually created a crisis of talent retention and a decline in product quality. And if we keep asking, and then what, we find a third order. The cost of recruiting and training new staff eventually exceeds the money saved by the initial cuts. The fix becomes a massive long-term liability. These ripples aren't just poor management, although a strong argument can be made that managerial decision-making in the current corporate environment is amazingly short-sighted. Beyond that, though, there's inherent features of complex systems that require second-order thinking. In any system where parts are interconnected, global supply chains, biological ecosystems, or even in your own personal habits, you can't touch one part without sending a wave through all the rest. To ignore that ripple is to completely ignore reality. This leads to a somewhat unsettling realization, something we can call the law of conservation of problems. We know from physics that energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed from one state into another. Something very similar applies to problem solving in complex systems. Problems are rarely eliminated. Instead, they get transformed into different states. The history of human progress makes this abundantly clear. During the Industrial Revolution, the great problem was physical labor and scarcity. We lacked the muscle power to produce enough food, clothing, and tools for a rapidly growing population. Our solution was mechanization. We solved the bottleneck of physical energy. But we didn't delete the problem of struggle. We transformed it. We traded the problem of physical exhaustion and famine for the modern epidemic of mental burnout and cognitive overload. We moved from a world where the primary stressor was not having enough to a world where the primary stressor is having too much information, too much connectivity, too much pressure to perform in hyper-efficient digital landscapes. The physical labor bottleneck was replaced by a mental capacity bottleneck. The problems didn't vanish, they just changed their shape. Accepting that problems will always exist in some form means stopping the search for the perfect permanent solution. There's no such thing. There's only trade-offs. Every time we solve a problem, we're essentially negotiating with the universe, deciding which set of problems we're more willing to live with. This is a heavy realization, but it's also kind of liberating. It shifts our focus from a futile search for perfection to a much more useful search for better. If we know that every solution creates new problems, how do we navigate this without becoming completely paralyzed by indecision? The key is to move from reactive fixing to proactive forecasting. One of the most powerful tools for this technique is called pre-mortem analysis. In a standard post-mortem analysis, You look at a project after it's failed and you see what went wrong. In a pre-mortem analysis, you imagine that you're in the future already and your new solution has failed miserably. You sit down and work backward to figure out why. When you're about to implement some kind of change, you ask yourself, who or what loses when this succeeds? If you implement new software to speed up your team's workflow, who loses? Maybe it's the junior employees who lose the opportunity to learn the manual way, which is essential for their development. Maybe the clients lose that personal touch, that human interaction. It's not a cynical approach, it's a responsible one. There's a delicate balance between innovation and the ethical responsibility to predict human costs. Self-driving vehicles are another really good example. The first order win is efficient transportation of people and goods. But the second order casualty could be the livelihoods of millions of professional drivers, or the restructuring of urban environments that were designed around human-driven car ownership. Politicians, business leaders, and everyday people contemplating life changes have a responsibility to look for unintended casualties. We need to weigh the immediate benefit against the potential cost to the broader systems that we operate in. That allows us to ask if the problem we're solving is worth the new problem that we're creating. So where does all this leave us? If we can't stop problems from emerging, and if every solution carries a hidden price tag, how do we live effectively? The goal shouldn't be to find a perfect permanent solution that stops all change. That's an impossibility. Instead, the goal should be to build for resilient adaptation. Instead of building rigid structures that break under the pressure of new problems, we should strive to create flexible systems that expect and can absorb new challenges. In your personal life, this might mean instead of an ultra-rigid 5 a.m. morning routine that falls apart the moment you haven't had a good night's sleep, you create a modular routine, something that can scale up or down based on your energy levels. Flexibility, that's such a key. You can also apply recursive thinking. That's the habit of looping back to evaluate your own progress constantly to almost any area of your life. Here's a few steps you can take. First thing, map the layers. Whenever you make a significant decision, write down the first order effect, and then force yourself to write down at least 3 and then what scenarios. Don't stop at the first layer. Second, identify the trade-off. Be honest with yourself. Instead of saying, this change will make me more productive, say, this change, yeah, it's going to make me more productive, but it's likely going to cost me time for the deep creative thinking I like to do. Or maybe it's going to cost me sleep or other areas of well-being. Acknowledge the cost up front. Third, design for graceful failure. When you implement a new system, a good question to ask yourself, if this fails, or if it creates a new problem, how can I ensure the system, the whole thing, doesn't just collapse? Build in buffers, redundancies, and escape hatches. Ultimately, second-order thinking isn't about avoiding all the problems. That's a fantasy. The true mastery lies in the ability to choose better problems. It's about moving away from the shallow, reactive fixes that leave us completely exhausted and stuck, and moving toward intentional, thoughtful decisions that allow us to navigate a complex world with purpose and with clarity. We may never reach a world without problems. In fact, we probably won't. But we can reach a world where the problems we face are the problems we're actually prepared to solve. That's all I have for today. Thanks very much for watching. I appreciate it if you'd take a minute to hit that like and subscribe button. Thanks again. Take good care.
It's easy to love, but it's hard to forget. I remember, baby, I was your favorite pet, oh yeah. Don't make no difference anymore. No difference. No difference. No difference.